Oh, hello. Funny seeing me here. But I'm actually here for practical purposes. Today we're going to be looking at big books. You know what I'm saying? Big books. And I can't really manipulate those books while I'm hiding behind the camera now, can I? So here I am to lift as a heavy reader. I'm wearing the shirt that was given to me by the Books of Some Substance podcast, which I was on to talk about the Satanic Verses, which, although pretty hefty, didn't make the cut. But this is in the black metal style logo, and it says heavy reader, so it's very relevant. And so this particular video will be talking about big books I've read, because, you know, it's social media. People love sharing big books that they haven't read and that they may never read. But occasionally I like to give myself a challenge and knock some of these bad boys down, like, let's say, David and Goliath. So why don't we get started, shall we? The first one I have in this pile is The Tunnel by William H. Gass. This is something I did a group read of not too long ago with my good friend Ryan Alexander, and I'll put his info in the description. I actually have a signed paperback of this that I made a custom case for. That I will not show you today, maybe another day. But this is the first edition hardcover. Not signed, unfortunately, but still very much beautiful. And the cover, or the hardcover in particular, has colored illustrations. And here we have the red rectum insignia that, if you've read the book, you'll know what it means exactly. But I wrote a review, which I'll link in the description for you, and this book is probably the most successful anti-novel I've read, because, and I realized this recently, or maybe I'm remembering because on walks I'm picking up again the audiobook and listening to it while I'm walking. It's so beautiful and imagistic. And he has, the main character, William Kohler, is an anti-hero, emphasis on anti. He is very unlikable, very unlovable, if we'll go that far, and has some very dark, dirty, repulsive thoughts. As a human being that, well, from time to time we may all have thoughts like that to one degree or another that we may not want to admit to. But he lays it all out, rectum and all. But balancing that out are these passages of pure nostalgia for his childhood that, I mean, you can taste the candy he loves, you can smell the toys and the farming and the locusts. It's so visceral that even though it's a deconstructed construction of a novel, very successful, I think. And it was actually old Billy Gass's birthday recently, the late Billy Gass. Wish he was still here with us, writing and sharing his love of literature, but we can always visit him through his books. And this one I highly recommend. This is his magnum opus. Next here we have some translated literature. This is We the Drowned by Karsten Jensen, who I interviewed recently. Let's see, I just love this. Let me see if I can show you without destroying this. Look at this dust jacket. That is beautiful, and it really tells you what you're gonna get into. This is about the Danish seafarers back in the day, particularly Danish sailors who set sail off the coast of an island called Marstal, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this was translated by Charlotte Barsland with Emma Ryder, who helped, translated from the Danish. And this is the UK edition that I tracked down, and it's signed by Karsten Jensen himself. So, really love this. And, oh, I didn't even mention the page count. The page count on this one clocks in. It's 693 pages, so if you ever feel like you have a micro penis, pick up a big book, and it'll act like literary Viagra for you. And the page count on the tunnel, so we can do some comparison. Although it's not so accurate when you figure in margins and font size, but this one is clocking in at 651. Let me share with you something. The beginning of this novel is particularly impressive. And look at this. Always love a good map, right? A good map, whether it's fantasy or not. It starts with chapter 1, The Boots. Many years ago, there lived a man called Laraholic who went up to heaven and came down again thanks to his boots. He didn't soar as high as the tip of the mast on a full-rigged ship. In fact, he got no further than the main. Once up there, he stood outside the pearly gates and saw Peter. Though the guardian of the gateway to the hereafter merely flashed his bare arse at him, Laraholic should have been dead, but death didn't want him, and he came back down, a changed man. And had the prose been tweaked just a bit, elevated just a bit, this would be like a masterpiece this side of Salman Rushdie and Midnight's Children. But as it stands, it's still a wonderful, beautiful read that I would recommend to you for all the stories that you get of the sailors and the wives and the broken families who are left behind on the island. And the ending. The ending is one of the best I've read in fiction. It's wonderful. Do yourself a favor, pick up a copy. Next big book is, not only is it physically big, page length big, but it's also even bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, and it's Ulysses by James Joyce. This is a special edition I got after my 3-month deep read as a reward to myself. And aside from the fact of what I just said, as far as this big book, I read 2 crutches in particular. The new Bloomsday book, which clocks in around 300 pages, and even more crucial, the Gifford Guide, which clocks in around some 700 or so pages, and all together it was well over 1,000 pages, and this is a monolith of literature if I've ever read one. People always talk about, how it's set 24 hours a day, a Jew wandering Dublin, but the way it heightens this simplistic story structure is through the language, and so the episodes, we'll take a look at this. It's illustrated, it has some beautiful illustrations, if I can find those in particular. The language. So there's a chapter in here set in a maternity ward, and from the beginning to the end of the chapter, the language evolves like a fetus from, the Latinate words and things of that nature all the way up to modern day, which is Ulysses itself. That's Molly Bloom herself laying in bed. All I can tell you is I've yet to find a book that is better than this one. I mean, each book has its own pros and cons, but I'm talking about total experience. This one, There's even a podcast by, I think his name is Frank Delaney. He didn't live long enough to finish the project, but he had a podcast where he just talked about each line of Ulysses week by week. And that just demonstrates the depth that this book has. Astounding depth and beautiful language. There's actually, speaking of language, there's a chapter called Sirens. Sirens, the mythological beings who sing and hope that sailors come and crash their boats on the bare rocks. And the language reflects that by being mellifluous and melodic. So I'm breaking a sweat lifting these big books, but the next one is Laraholic by Alexander Thoreau. Laraholic, or The Sexual Intellectual. Very weird title, but that actually comes from the column that the protagonist writes for this, or in his job. His name's Eugene I. Stones. Leave it to Thoreau. He out pinch on as far as naming characters. And the eponymous character, the titular character, Laraholic, is, well, all of them are just so well wrought. He has such a knack for characterization, including caricaturization, if that's even a word, because his characters are not only larger than life, but more distorted than life. They can be extremely ugly. So you have the character Ratmaster in here who hates God and goes on monologues against him. You have Disc Knickers, a character who hates Jews. You have a misandrist. Mind you, the misogynist is Dr. Crucifer and Darkville's cat, probably the best literary villains of all time. But we have misandrists, we have all kinds of unsightly, ugly characters. There's a blurb from Norman Mailer, speaking of ugly characters, wife stabbers. He says, Warholic is brilliantly written. There's plenty in here to offend people who, have a knee-jerk reaction, don't want to even think why, what, how is this being written. And Thoreau kind of feeds into that by trolling the trolls, if you know what I mean. But for the reader who is careful, who reserves their emotions at a later time and just takes in what's being written here, you'll begin to see what Thoreau is trying to do. I think he accomplishes it. And actually, this might be one of the best, if not the best, novels of this century. As far as the page count, this one clocks in at 878 pages. And Alex, I'm calling him by his first name, Alex was kind enough to sign it for me. He says, to George and friendship, and he has a Latin-speaking doodle there. I don't know if you can see this. Let's see if I can read it. Ars lingua vitae. No, I can't read that. Yeah, okay. What do we have next? A few more, if you'll bear with me. Underworld by Don DeLillo. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I've read a lot of DeLillo, all of his later work, missing some of his earlier work. But this, I think, is his undisputed opus, unless I read Libra and think otherwise. But the scope of this can't be beat. This is the Cold War novel and one of the New York novels, which reminds me that I forgot to take down Women and Men. Anyway, this one I purchased signed Don DeLillo as a pretty, what do you call it, modest signature compared to the scope of his writing. And this actually says it's a special signed copy, not for sale. So this must have been used for marketing purposes. I'm not sure actually the history on it, but just the opener alone. Many people say the opener is better than the rest of the book. The opener alone is absolutely wonderful, one of the best openers to any novel. I won't go so far as to say that the rest of the book doesn't live up to the opener, and I will say actually the ending is also one of the best endings in a novel I've read. The first prologue, it's the triumph of death, and it begins, "He speaks in your voice, American." And there's a shine in his eye that's halfway hopeful. I think that's actually something, he added that sentence after years working on this. "He speaks in your voice, American," if I remember correctly. But what can I say about this? You know, you have authors who have different muses, and this is not an insult, but one of Don DeLillo's muses is garbage, and he waxes philosophical about garbage in this. And of course it opens with a baseball game that's being watched by various figures in history. I won't name the whole roster, but suffice it to say, read this. And come on, I'm a lit pro, dude. This is Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, probably one of the biggest books I read starting out with reading challenging, difficult books. And yes, it was challenging, it was difficult. Not as difficult as all that. Once you get attuned to his unique prose style, which combines colloquialisms with technicalities, academic ease with slacker talk, things of that nature. Once you get attuned to that, it's really not that difficult, other than just the stamina required to read the whole thing. Unlike Ulysses, which is so packed with allusions that it's intellectually impossible to unearth everything from Ulysses without a guide. But this, you don't necessarily need a guide unless you want to make more sense of its unconventional structure, which notoriously DFW said was a lopsided Sierpinski gasket, lopsided because of editors hacking away at it and him having to make cuts himself. What I love about this book, the cover of this first edition, this isn't a true first edition, but you know, it's a first edition. What I love about this book is the combination of tragedy and humor. A lot of people focused on the humor bits without the tragedy, but you can't have one without the other in this book. And it taught me as a writer that each element can heighten the other. Because when I was first starting out as a writer, almost everything was sad and morose. I mean, Don DeLillo was kind of like that. He looks down the barrel of the gun, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It depends on how you accomplish it, how you execute it. But I love me some humor, and a lot of the humor in this has stayed with me, like the weird yogi in the boys' locker room who licks sweat off their bodies. So creepy but funny, and that stayed with me. And you know, the video phone excerpt, if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't read this, I mean, you can continue to pretend or give it a shot. If it's not to your liking, no worries, come on. I'm not a gatekeeper of literature, but I do encourage people to give it their best try. And I cheated by reading this on the Kindle, so I didn't have to physically flip back and forth from footnote or endnote to the main text. But the next time I read this, I'm going to subject myself to that just to see what it's like and see how pissed off I can get or annoyed or what have you. But speaking of pissed off and annoyed, yeah, there's sections in here that, well, they're irritating a bit maybe. There's sections in here that are boring. There's sections in here that are ethereal. There's sections in here that put the sex in section. There's sections in here that, just the full range of emotions you'll experience with a big book like this. And there's not many like this, despite their word count. And, there's a lot of authors who've been trying to, hack writers who've been trying to replicate DFW. You can't replicate him because he's part of the zeitgeist, which is that time, like right before the full-on birth of the internet. It was crowning when this came out, so to speak. And so it captures that time, just like Mark Twain captures the time of the Civil War in that era. But yeah, the cover on this DFW didn't like, because he said it looked almost like a spitting image of the flight pamphlets on an airline. But I mean, it's so unique, and now I can't extricate the image of the cover with everything that's inside. So I'm biased, I can't really say one way or another, but I like the cover. And I like the blue of the book itself. So unless I go and grab Women and Men, this is going to be the last one. Miss Macintosh, My Darling by Margaret Young. So I talked about how big books can help people with their micro penises. If you have a big, you know what, put this in here and that'll help you. So equality. I don't like this book, but look at this. This is just a beautiful object in and of itself. And I'll tell you why I don't like the book. I like the idea of it. I like the first handful of pages, or the first quarter or so, but it's written in such a way, such a redundant and repetitive way, that if you read the first 25 pages, first 50 pages, you've read the next 100 pages, the next 200, the next 300, the next 400, the next 500, and so on. This clocks in at almost 1,200 pages, and it just goes on and on about butterflies, the sea, the beach, planets, stardust, stars. So the combination of the pastoral with kind of outer space, and it just rehashes those images over and over and over again. There's not many characters in here, so there's no saving grace in that way. Some of the characters include a guy who's a twin, and if I remember correctly, his twin died in childbirth or something like that, and he's obsessed with wondering if he is his twin and his twin is him, which is a wonderful concept, not executed effectively because of how redundant it is. And then also, who is it? Vera Cartwheel's mother. The protagonist's mother is in an opium fever dream in which she meets crows who have created the universe. Sounds wonderful, is wonderful, but executed poorly because of the way it's structured. And that's just my opinion. If you can withstand repetition, all the more power to you. But there's a psychological phenomenon known as semantic satiation. If you keep hearing the same word over and over, it starts to sound weird in a bad way. It kind of loses its meaning, and that's what I experienced with this. But I'm not opposed to giving it another try later on. Here's the funny thing, though. My friend Ryan, who I mentioned I did the tunnel group read with, he's been looking forward to this. I told him my opinion, and we did a test. I randomly read a passage, and it hit all the imagery, the dozen or so, Vegas dozen of images that I laid out for you and for him. And then he had his copy that he randomly read a passage from it. Same thing. This is being reprinted by Talk the Archive. Get a copy, see for yourself. You may like it, you may not, but don't take my opinion for it. And I'm going to go get the last big book, Women and Men by Joseph McElroy. I also hosted a group read with Ryan on this one. This is the first edition, which I got signed by Joe. I recently flew to New York to experience the city and meet Joe. He's a wonderful person in more ways than one. Oops, don't want to break this. And I'm going to be writing an essay about my visit. Let's see. Now the dust jacket does not want to cooperate for some reason. But this is the kind of book where I read it. Not only does it have a wonderful beginning, but it felt like it was moving literature forward, which is very hyperbolic to say. I don't think it ultimately succeeded, but there are seeds in here of what literature, what novels, the novel as a form can do, what sentences as a structure can do, ideas, etc. There are seeds in here that I would recommend to any writer who's interested in what's possible, what can be pushed. So really loved the first half. The second half I didn't really like, but I wrote a review of this. I have some reviews of other ones in this pile, which I'll put a link to in the description, and if you want to know more details. But the ending was really good, I will say. And even before the ending, there's a story within the novel, story within a story, which is phenomenal. And almost in the way, if you've seen the HBO show The Leftovers in that way, I could almost envision it as being a kind of leftovers show that's adapted by HBO and kind of has similar vibes. But essentially it's about a bomb that discriminates against organic matter, so it only explodes inorganic matter. But then when you explode buildings, you have people floating down from the sky, not falling, but floating down from the sky and being changed and having parts of their brain obliterated or altered by this bomb. So there's plenty of sci-fi to be found in this, but it hits so many different notes. Let me read a bit of the beginning. Division of labor unknown. And it opens up with what other than a birth. After all, she was not so sure what had happened or when it had started, which was probably not a correct state to be in, because what had happened made the biggest difference in her life so far. Hours of life that worked her back full to breaking of pain and drained it of its work when the back of her child's head with a slick of dark hair and its rounded shoulders gave her that last extra push to free its arms still held inside her. She would tell her husband later. She knew she would, and she did tell him. She told her husband, and he told others for weeks afterward. Also, he had his own side to tell. She loved his excitement. And while that's not anything particularly surreal, you'll notice the surreal, if you will, structure of some of those sentences, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Women and men, very big. Did I mention the page count? I can't remember. So if I already did, then you're going to get it again. It's around, let's say, 1,200 pages, like Miss Macintosh. So, big books. Read them, buy them, but read them too. Don't be so scared of them, because they're not so scared of you after all. And, oh, this is going to collapse just from the weight. The only book that's really lived up to the difficulty was Ulysses, and but the guides really helped me. And it really is just a matter of mostly stamina and dedication. And so if you ever think, you know, you're not good enough as a reader, it only takes dedication. Look up words you don't know, reread passages that don't make sense the first time around, and you'll grow as a reader, because reading is an activity, at least for me, it's an activity of, you know, building the intellectual muscle. But there's also pleasure. You can't forget the pleasure part of it. A lot of people read for a lot of different reasons, but when it comes to big books, don't be intimidated. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Not scripted at all, not edited, except no jump cuts. I'm not going to jump scare you. This was me and you just talking together, and I can hear your thoughts on the other side saying, can't you just finish this video already? So I will. Let me know, have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? If not, are you looking forward to reading any of these? And what about other big books? What have you read? What do I need to read that I haven't gotten to yet? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and you'll see me next time, or I'll be behind the camera. But whichever it is, thank you so much, and see you next time.